Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Marine Bio Movie Club. This week we are talking about Happy Feet, and we are a week late. I was very busy, my bad. We'll try and stay on schedule moving forward, but this week we are going to be talking about Happy Feet, which if you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. Great movie. Definitely more entertainment than science, but that's okay. There are some stuff that's good to talk about in the film. But yeah, I guess Kendra, do you have any opening remarks about the movie?
It was so funny because of all of the sexual innuendos.
Yeah, it is a little bit sexy. As an adult watching it, you're like,
I called my mom after and I was
like, up as a kid.
Do you remember this? Like, were you uncomfortable watching this with me as a kid? Because there's a lot. My favorite was in the beginning. Also, a lot of songs in it are in Pitch Perfect, like the Pitch Perfect franchise. So that made me laugh because that's like one of my favorite movie franchises.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, they probably just watched Happy Feet and were like, oh, that song, write that down. But they did Let's Talk About Sex, but just said, let's talk about X or eggs. I think maybe they said eggs.
I think eggs.
I was like, that song isn't even that's not even like a blatant, like a subtle reference to sex.
Eggs,
it's literally a song about sex.
So funny. But yeah, it was definitely more sexy than I think I remembered as a kid. There's also so much religious undertone to the film. The very, very plays a lot on that culty religious sort of idea. The whole first scene, they're all, or with the eggs, they're all worshiping their
chanting the
great Grim or whatever his name is, the big penguin in the sky that brings them the food or whatever it is. And I was like, wow, I don't remember this being so.
Well, I think that they called dancing heresy or blasphemous, very religious,
a little bit footloose vibes.
Yeah.
So we see Mumble, I forget his parents' name.
His parents' names are Norma Jean
and Memphis, right?
So it's Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley.
Yeah. So the parents, the first scene is them mating or whatever. They do get it right. Penguins do mate monogamously for the most part that we know of. So that whole sort of idea, I think a lot of it too was based off of, did you ever watch, what was it called? The Penguin March or
March
something?
of the Penguins.
March of the Penguins. Thank you.
Yeah.
That documentary that
before or
became,
after?
I want to say before.
Maybe. I don't remember.
I don't know for sure.
Isn't it super sad?
I have not seen it since it came out, so I couldn't tell you. Maybe that's one we'll watch.
Yeah, maybe. I feel like it was sad. People, I think a baby died.
It's definitely one of the, I think it was a cross between a nature documentary and a actual doc. I don't know how to describe it. I honestly don't remember.
Morgan Freeman narrate it?
Couldn't tell you.
Okay, I think he does.
But it definitely was giving me major March of the Penguins vibes, the beginning of the movie, minus the sexual singing. But yeah, so they make their egg and the egg hatches, and before it hatches, Memphis drops it, and so they think that when he hatches, that's why
he's a dancer.
He has little tippity tappities in his feet or whatever. And so a lot of this plot is not based in the science part. Most of the science topics that we can talk about kind of come later on. I did write that Miss Viola is iconic. His little singing teacher, where she's oh! She's you have to let it out. Let it out. It's just so funny.
So funny.
But they did, so the one part that I did want to mention from the beginning that sort of relates back, I guess, to the marine sciences. When he's a little kid, the Skuas come in and try and eat him. And when he's talking to the Skuas, well, one, they're talking about humans, and the Skua has his little tag on him. But they also, the Skua says something the penguins eat the fish and we eat the fish, but now because there's no fish, we eat the penguins. And it kind of is this idea of trophic cascade.
Yeah.
In a little bit. in this case, I feel like we've talked a lot about trophic cascade when it comes to like pertaining to things like sharks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Yeah.
more that top down effect, like apex predator removal leads
Mm-hmm.
to the trickling down. In this case, it's almost like bottom up effect.
Yeah.
Humans are overfishing things like sardines and whatever the penguins are eating. And so now the penguins are in trouble, but also other animals that would rely on that as a primary food source are looking for other things to feed on.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
But don't they also just eat baby penguins anyway?
I didn't look it up.
Okay.
I
feel
wouldn't
like
be
I've heard
surprised.
about that.
They're basically like big seagulls, and seagulls
Yeah.
will eat anything, and so I'm pretty sure. I do think the skuas will eat the baby penguins in the wild. I didn't look it up to.
But it'd be like
that.
a week. It kind of Mumble was away from the family, so it would be like a Mumble situation.
Right. And later on in the movie, you do see all the skuas kind of lined up around the brim of their little valley or wherever they're hanging out, kind of like waiting.
Yeah.
But it definitely still kind of brings up that idea of like, oh, well, if one thing's out of balance, it can throw off like the rest of the ecosystem, basically. And then we do obviously get the first mention of the aliens, which we later find out are humans.
We look pretty funny.
Yeah, and it also sort of like talks about like, competition between species, right? So the fish now, because there's less fish, you're getting more intense competition between the skua and the penguin for that fish. Whereas if there was more fish, you wouldn't see that same over competition essentially between the species. So kind of interesting. I mean, we can kind of skip a lot of the movie because so much of it is just like more Mumble's story.
The little Hispanic penguins.
They're so funny. They're so funny.
They were the best part.
Oh, hands down the best part of that movie.
Matt was like, why are they Hispanic? And I was like, probably because these are the ones that are like hanging out in Chile would be my guess, is like the basis for it. Or it's just the movie at the time.
Well, what are they? Are they rockhopper penguins?
Yeah, they're supposed to be rockhopper penguins.
Yeah, so I don't know.
I don't know if they go over,
I'm
but
not
I was
a
like,
penguin
there
expert.
are penguins that are in South America.
Yeah, I'm not a penguin expert, so don't take my word for it,
Yeah.
But they do they like show the difference, right? Like different mating systems or different ways of attracting mates for different species, which is a legitimate thing. And you could get a lot into like the behavior of mating and whatnot. So like with emperor penguins and trying to attract a mate with the rocks for the rockhopper penguins, which is just so cute.
It's adorable.
Like I would love to see that in person, like little penguin just be like, I bring you a pebble.
Dropping rocks.
Yeah, which is a real thing. And so I did think it's cool. I will say I love how like in the beginning of the movie, the ladies go out to get the fish and the dad sits there on the freaking egg because that's where they belong. I was like, yes, stay at home dad, like working mom, let's do it, kind of thing. Which is actually not that uncommon, I feel like, in the bird world for the males to actually hold a lot of the parental care, especially in monogamous systems.
Yeah, and the ones where they're monogamous and the male sticks around, it is more common.
Yeah, but it's interesting. But
when like it depends on like the food source, because for them they have to go out to get it because they're so inland. Whereas like with like macaws, it's not necessarily what's going to happen,
right?
Because they're monogamous.
But I guess eventually he meets the rockhopper penguins. They like do that whole avalanche scene where they knock the excavator off the cliff, and that's kind of like the first recurrence of the aliens after his encounter as a kid with the skua. And then they meet Lovelace, who is not a rockhopper penguin, right?
No, he's not.
Oh, what is the name?
They used to know penguins really well. They're
my favorite. Why can't I remember their name? Or is he the rockhopper penguin? And the other ones are like Adelaide penguins or something.
Oh wait, no. Yeah, no, they do look like they're Adelie penguins or Adelaide. They could be a couple, but it looks like he might be a royal penguin. There's a couple different ones that have like that
The little
crest.
frillies.
Yeah.
So what do the rockhopper penguins look like?
Rockhopper. Oh, they do kind of look like that. Some of them do, but it depends on like the species. So this is southern and northern rockhopper penguins. And then there are, so I think he might be a rockhopper penguin or he could be one of these other ones. And then the little ones are all Adelie penguins, which is this top one.
Yes, that seems more correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We clearly aren't penguin experts. So
yeah.
Probably should have looked that up before we started this conversation, but that's fine.
It's okay.
But Lovelace has the soda ring around his neck. And it just brought me back to like as a kid, always cutting those things, like before you put them in the trash. You could just, not use them, but that's a different issue. But then he sort of like talks about how he was abducted by aliens and they bestowed this present upon him, which obviously later on in the movie we find out is not true. But definitely like, I thought it was interesting because I'm like, I wonder what wildlife actually thinks of like the garbage and stuff. I'm sure it's mostly horrible. Like there's so many videos and stuff out there of like sharks with plastic bags around their necks and things like that, where they clearly look like they're in distress. But it was kind of an interesting perspective, like,
there's like bowerbirds who might really like them for their, like, depending on the bowerbird, how they do their nesting with like a lot of color. So like cool plastics could come in favor for them.
For sure. And I'm sure that's part of why we see like different ingestion issues. I know we see that a lot in fish because our plastics tend to be like yellows and whites and things. And so a lot of fish eat them unknowingly, thinking that they're something more exciting. Or I was always told, like, when I brush my dog out, I should leave the fur outside so the birds can take it and like use it for their nest. But I've definitely seen birds like pick up plastic and things and put it in their nest. So they clearly are either just utilizing the tool that was given to them or think it's maybe something that it's not, But Lovelace has the soda rings around his neck. And they later travel to get those removed. Well, accidentally. More so, mumbles like, take me to your leader, basically. Trying to get answers about where the fish all gone because his cult has banned him from his home.
Well, because they think he's the reason that they're not getting fish, right? Or like something's wrong with him and it's like a bad
classic
omen.
Blair, like classic witch hunt kind of thing. Where we had like women, they're like, oh, you're a witch, we have to kill you or ban you because
that'll
you're
help
the
our
reason
society.
Yeah, our society is struggling because you, witch lady. Like kind of the same sort of vibe, like the church or his flock, I don't know, whatever you would call it, are like, you need to go, you're the reason we don't have fish. And so he goes on this journey to find the fish so that he can go back home, kind of like a mark my words sort of moment. And they travel across the land of the elephant seals. They all have an Australian accent.
One Steve Irwin.
Really?
And it came out 2 months after he died.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. And so I kind of like wondering if they had like a dedication that they added.
They probably did
at the end.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't watch the credits. I also thought it was kind of interesting that it's appeared to be all males. And from my understanding of elephant seals, at least in like California, is that it's typically one big male with his like harem of females. So I found that kind of interesting. That could have just been like a movie choice for all we know.
I think it was.
But
dancing.
Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I'm also not an elephant seal expert. But from my understanding, it was like the bull male with all of his female.
I feel like I've heard that too, but maybe there's like certain gatherings where because
Maybe.
like there are the times when like they will fight each other.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be times where they do gather with just like more masses of multiple males, multiple
Maybe.
females.
Yeah. They're definitely not friendly with other males though, I feel like.
Yeah, they're not.
In the movie, they're all like buddies.
I've seen the videos of them getting all bloody and snotty,
Yeah, it's
fighting
scary.
with each other. It's gross.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
big animals for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they make it past the land of the elephant seals, and then they get to sort of like the human camp in Antarctica for whatever,
which had a church
village
in the most stupid area. Like as we were watching, I was like, who would put a church on the top of a hill that you have to like walk up and down to in Antarctica from your little city?
It's definitely like a little
port.
fishing village that they've sort of created just for the commercial fishermen. But
they needed a chapel.
Well, of course, because this
with
movie's
all the
about
religion.
But they run into the orcas, who subsequently release Lovelace from his little soda ring trash necklace.
Yeah.
Orcas do play with their food, so that was pretty accurate.
Yep. It would have been cool to see an ecotype that wasn't the most basic of the ecotypes, mostly because Southern Hemisphere killer whales are really freaking cool. There's really there are like, especially in Antarctica, obviously they just did a killer whale. They might not have even known about these other ecotypes, but it would have been cool to like see like one of the type C's or type D's that have like literally an eye patch that is like this little.
That'd be cool.
But I'm
sure they were trying to use like, it's a kids movie, so I'm sure they were aiming for the most recognizable.
But
that is cool. It would have been cool to be more like accurate to location.
Yeah. Well, and they didn't say where they are, but from if they're so inland, I think I looked at the time when after I watched it, I was like, okay, how accurate is this ecotype? Because there's like the pack ice ecotype, and they were closer to shore.
They're like onshore in the movie.
Yeah, so I was like, I don't think
we're in like a little cove. It's kind of unclear. And I'm sure part of that too is for movie magic, right? Like he ends up jumping off the cliff and swimming out into the open ocean, following the boats like right there.
Yeah.
So I guess it makes sense.
So
that it could be a deeper ocean species, but it would be more accurate to be.
They picked the Antarctic type A, which is our top friend up here.
Got it.
Essentially, these ones are far cooler. I mean, these ones are basically yellow and brown because of diatom buildup that they then go up to South America to rub off once every few years, and they come back looking basically normal.
That's so cool.
I love Southern Hemisphere killer whales.
Yeah.
Because Northern Hemisphere killer whales all look the same. They don't really, but like they look like this basic.
Very minor differences.
They all look like this type A one.
Yeah.
Then we get all these.
That'd be so cool,
sick buddies.
They also looked like 2 males.
It was 2 males, yeah.
Which I guess is still possible. Like there are multiple bulls in pods.
It is. It's not unusual too if like males do hunt at some point like together. If we wanted to get into like some nitty-gritties about killer whale group forming that we know with resident killer whales, when they all hang out, the males will go off and form their own sociosexual groups where they have fun with one another.
Oh, right on.
Which includes sex. Basically, they're like
they're gay whales.
Yeah, they're gay whales. It's basically hanging out where the boys go be boys with each other.
Fun.
And playing with your
Do we have evidence of that happening in our
we only have evidence of it with residents. No, we only have it with residents because residents are the populations we've studied the most.
For sure. It's a lot harder to get to Antarctica than it is to the southern residents.
Yeah. Well, and like northern residents. And I think maybe it's been observed in Norwegian species. I don't know if there's a study on it yet, but I think it's been like just visually affirmed.
Got it. So it's safe to say that it's definitely a possibility, just maybe not.
Yeah, it's possible that it's
confirmed
in every species that they have these like
male groups.
Same sex interactions. So part of me was like, oh, maybe this is
gay whales.
But it's probably just that they have big dorsal fins and it's cool to animate.
Yeah, I'm sure. it's more recognizable for sure than a
Yeah.
smaller dorsal. Yeah, I thought that was interesting because if it's a normal pod structure, also I wanted to see like, do they typically have, because there was only 2 individuals at least that were shown on the camera, which seemed to me kind of odd.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, but we do know with more mammal eating species to a certain regard, they have smaller groupings. So like transients up here, they do tend to have smaller family groups they travel with, but they will like have super pod events where they join up with their other pods or they'll interact with other transients. Whereas southern like resident killer whales do
Tend
have
to be larger groups.
Yeah, like we have J-pod, but even then like the matrilines will split up and sometimes we'll only see one matriline.
Got it.
And so sometimes we'll only see like 5 whales within the islands
Right.
of like J-pod, but the rest of J-pod is out somewhere else. But they usually are kind of more together.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. But yeah,
So
so Orca's released Lovelace from his little necklace that he's gotten from the humans, which he seems stoked about. And then Mumble gets really mad and he starts following the big fishing boats because they kind of go up to the top of the hill and there's so many of them.
And he swims all the way to somewhere.
Florida.
Oh yeah, and I was like, you'd be dead.
He's carried by the ocean currents and brought to Florida, which would definitely not work out for him given that he's an emperor penguin and emperor penguins don't go in even like remotely warm climates.
Yeah, he would, 1, probably wear out. 2,
for sure he would have been eaten at some point.
Yeah, he would have been eaten because he has energy wise, something would have been like, you're tired.
Yeah,
it's too warm, so he would overheat.
Yeah,
he'd be dead
for sure.
There's a lot of other things in this movie that aren't true, like the singing.
Fictional movie, so we're just gonna go with it.
Penguins don't sing modern pop and rock hits,
in case you were unaware.
Yeah,
but
regretfully.
But yeah, so he gets swept off to Florida and they do show a scene of like right before he kind of catches up to the boats first before they drive away, and he grabs onto the net and they like shake him off basically and drop him back into the water. And I was like, I don't see any bycatch in that net. I was like, there definitely would have been a little bycatch in there. Could have been more accurate. But it did show like the enormity, I guess, of commercial fishing in that sense. My boyfriend literally, I think he was, I really hope he was joking, but he came up to me, he's like, is this movie based on a real story? And I was like, no. I think he more just meant, he's like, is it based on like a real like penguin that they found?
Inspired people.
Yeah. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure no. I was like, I wish, because at the end they like end commercial fishing in Antarctica.
Yeah, that was,
I was like, I wish it was real. Yeah, that tweet was funny. But I was like, I wish it was real because then we wouldn't have overfishing in Antarctica, but it's not.
Yeah, it just ends all fishing.
But they definitely do sort of like bring up this idea of like overfishing, which is sort of the undertone, I guess, or the main topic of this documentary, or not this documentary, this movie. And we've already talked a lot about overfishing, obviously, through some of the other stuff that we've discussed, but I guess it looked at it more from an animal perspective in this movie. Obviously it's fiction, but they do sort of take the idea of like, okay, well, maybe you don't care about fish, but you'd probably care about penguins.
The penguins are suffering.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because obviously once he makes it to Florida, he's brought to like a zoo or a aquarium or whatever it is, SeaWorld probably. And before he becomes this like ambassador for the rest of his species, they kind of show like the mental issues associated with captivity. Like all of them are just like,
yeah, and it's very like sterile environment. And
yeah. And so that was kind of an interesting point of like just animal welfare, because we've talked about it in regards to like cetaceans since we've discussed things like blackfish. But I think it's sort of overlooked a lot in maybe other species,
Mhm.
like the lack of stimulation that they
Yeah, like you can
receive.
have a good penguin like exhibit enclosure habitat, but a
It's
lot of them
not the
are
real thing.
horrible and barren like that.
Yeah.
Like,
And even then though, like even some really good enclosures that I have seen, I still just think about it, I'm like, that's so little room for them to swim or so, like just not the same.
it's better like, well, especially I think too, it's harder with these like Antarctic species because there's South American penguins, South African
You
penguins
don't have
that,
to keep it as cold and
yeah, you can have like an outdoor looking exhibit that kind of like combines in and out. They can like
mhm.
swim. I've seen like some really cool ones, but with like emperor penguin ones, they usually look like something like this,
Yeah.
like
Because it has to be so
walled
cold in
off.
there, for
Yeah.
sure. Um, so yeah, it definitely just unfortunate. I think people underestimate the intelligence of birds quite a bit
Yes.
when it just comes to captivity in general. And I've definitely, I don't know, it's hard because like some birds, I'm like, they probably don't mind it too much. And obviously, birds can be a household pet. Like you can own a
Hmm.
parrot if you want. Um,
Yeah. Well, a lot of those cages, I worked with birds, and a lot of our birds that we had were like extremely unstable mentally because they were kept in cages. That like, and the thing is, pet stores sell the wrong cages
for sure.
for hamsters, for like pretty much most pets. I mean, most hamster cages are horrible because they're supposed to be like basically big terrariums.
Hmm.
And so same with bird cages. If you're gonna have a bird, people want birds. I would say only keep them in cages at night. It's when they're sleeping. Let them be a free ranging animal, even from your little tiny, like, what are those called? Lorikeets, the lories.
Hmm.
Up to especially with the bigger
Oh,
species.
my best friend from my childhood, her and her sister both had a little parakeet. Those birds were freaking psycho.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they do that because they're
Which
like,
I'm like, they're bored probably.
yeah. I mean, we had birds like they end up ripping out, and a lot of times people get them, realize they're a lot of work, and then turn them over to
For sure.
zoos. And so that's what I worked with a lot, where so they had like especially damaged personalities. There are great people who take care of their birds
For sure.
perfectly,
Yeah.
but they'll like rip
I
out their
will
own
say
feathers.
I feel like most people that I know that own birds, the ones that seem to enjoy their life the most are the ones that are allowed to roam the house
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, or allowed
Yeah.
to walk around and stuff. Um, I mean, it's obviously very, very different. Like growing up in Florida, you couldn't let your bird outside, even if it had like clip wings and you knew it wasn't going to fly away. There were
Mm-hmm.
so many predators that would have eaten your bird, that you can't just like let it roam. But I definitely have friends that like let their birds walk around their
In their
house
house.
and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah. And
um,
it does transfer like to all bird species, not just like the quote more intelligent
yeah.
ones, like chickens too, like chickens that are kept in like really horrible coops
Hmm.
and exhibit like whatever it is, have more issues like with health as well. I mean, same with like people when
Yeah.
we're trapped in like, I don't know, prison. You have more issues
Or
mentally and
quarantine.
physically, or yeah, or quarantine, high,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
So that makes sense. But I do think it's an interesting kind of conversation because we do tend, and I am guilty of this. At least when it comes to marine life, I always am like, well, highly migratory animals and birds can be pretty migratory depending on the species, obviously. Um, for me, I'm always like highly migratory, highly intelligent. I don't think should be in captivity. I think there's better ways that we can experience those things. And just even personally, I don't think I've ever necessarily lumped avian in with that highly
It's a different
intelligent.
kind of highly intelligent,
But they're
and
very, very
size,
smart.
they are, and size also plays a big role. You can have highly intelligent birds that are very successful in
Hmm.
captivity.
Yeah.
And like there's tons of data that proves like birds can live a full and healthy life to a certain regard, even longer than they can in the wild, whereas with
Hmm.
cetaceans and
It's
sharks,
pretty
it's against
clearly
you.
not. Yeah.
Your data's not there with you.
Hmm.
But I would say maybe the majority of people with birds, and with a lot of pets, they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And even like, you can look at zoos, there are a lot of bad zoos. that are doing it wrong.
There are good zoos out there.
There are
a lot of
really
bad
good
ones.
zoos. Yeah.
But yeah, I did think it was kind of interesting, just at least for me, because I was like, oh yeah, I don't know if I've ever really like actually considered like for penguin, you know, like I don't know, it's they're not the immediate species you think of when you think of captivity, at least when it comes to the marine biology world, at least for me. Obviously you have a different experience since you worked with them more specifically, but
yeah, the penguins are really mean at our zoo.
Really?
Yeah, mostly because just when you go to feed them, you just are dropping them the little fish and they peck at you. And so they always were trying to hand them off to the bird department because they were in the aquarium, and we were just like, pass, you guys can
like,
keep
I'm
yours.
good, keep your penguins.
You guys can have your penguins. We will take care of all the other birds at this zoo, which is like 400 plus.
Oh yeah, they're like a super popular, because they're like kind of the filler
literally
attraction,
every corner has a bird enclosure. And the founder of our zoo, like his wife, like breeds birds for the pet trade as well. Like she breeds like macaws and sells them to like people who want like a pet macaw all around the world. It's just really good, like vetting who she's selling them to, but like
for sure. But
they're
she
bird people.
Loved birds, so they had a lot of birds. Yeah,
some people abandoned birds. They were just like, okay, and
I'll take your bird.
We'd have like back in quarantine was full of birds. Like quarantine was almost exclusively birds.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was quarantine species, but there also, I think at one point we just have an area of just birds that are off exhibit because there's too many.
Yeah,
there's too many, and like they won't get along, got to switch them out.
Yeah,
like things happen.
That's interesting. Yeah, but I thought that was interesting. And then kind of on that same note, Mumble sort of becomes like an ambassador for his species, which is something that is a really common topic of discussion when it comes to captivity, because it does create this sort of compassion in people to care about animals. And you hear it a lot in the zoo and aquarium world, ambassador for your species, you know. When the aliens come down, I would love to look at those people and be like, are you gonna go be an ambassador for your species? But
go live with them.
Yeah, are you gonna go live in their exhibit as human ambassador for the rest of us? No, but it is this sort of idea that like, oh, well, if people care about this animal, if they've seen it, they can fall in love with the rest of the animals and want to protect them and pursue that conservation initiative. And obviously Mumble is like a dancing penguin, so people love him, and then they send him back to Antarctica to find the rest. They're like, where did this dancing penguin come from?
The whole clan of the whole cult of dancing penguins.
Yeah. And so but it does sort of bring up this idea of having captive animals and allowing those animals to be that ambassador, right, for the rest of their species, essentially. And I think nowadays with technology, we've got ways we can do that are a little bit easier.
Yeah,
you know,
well, and I
there's
think
so much stuff out there nowadays.
You could say that in this case, it was only successful because he went viral, because he was like a dancing penguin. Like if that animal, because of humans, like I think sometimes we just say ambassador for the species, and then that's the answer, and we let it go and don't do anything past that besides, oh, see, like,
oh, it's cute,
you love it, help save them, but don't ever actually do anything. But it took like this penguin going viral for something that it's just not penguin-y for people to care and then actually have action. And that was like my joke, where I was like, oh look, like we just have to like
to end overfishing, we just need a dancing penguin.
We need dancing penguins. Wow. Like we
didn't know
science and facts. It just took a dancing penguin, which I think is funny, because I feel like human nature, I mean, look at the straw situation. It was a video,
took
which is one turtle video, which most turtles don't have straws up their nose. Like it's an anomaly that's not common with straws. And then everything was banning straws, and which is good. But then a lot of people were like, hey, let's also focus on the actual
other piece of plastic,
all of it, which we find way more common, like bags in their stomachs, which bags have mostly, I think, for a lot of places, phased away. Not completely, but like you got to pay or something.
Unfortunately, I think now there's this issue where like you can't use single-use bags, but if you make your bag thick enough plastic, it's now reusable, and you're like, no.
Yeah, I think Longs does that, right?
I think they're slowly trying to switch, but it's that
But
same
a lot
kind
of
of
places
issue.
are like taxing extras. You got to pay like 15 cents for your bags, even paper bags. I mean, Hawaii does it with
Yeah.
paper bags. And
Which
so
I'm willing to
that's,
pay. I don't care.
yeah, it's like these
But
are like little solutions. I don't think they're, I know there are plastic bags up here. You should have to pay for it.
yeah.
But there's like other things where it was like the straw is not the only thing. And so for it's like dancing penguin though is what it takes to just end all
Yeah.
fishing.
But they do sort of show, and that's kind of almost like where the movie ends, where they're like, oh, we fell in love with this dancing penguin, and now we're going to end all commercial fishing.
It's the
Like the
montage of,
UN has a huge meeting,
Yep.
and they all decide that, and they show the debate back and forth a little bit of the people resisting and the people that are all for it. And eventually it's decided that Antarctica becomes an MPA, basically. Which would be dope. Doesn't happen though in
people
real
are,
life.
yeah, there's a
sadly.
big push for it. Every year they have restarted that big push.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big like component of like the Protect 30 by 30 campaign that's kind of going on, where we try and establish more MPAs. So if you don't know what an MPA is, it's a marine protected area. There's various levels of protection that an MPA can have. Some it's only a ban on commercial fishing. Some it's only a ban on fishing these species versus these species, or even there are some zones that are no take, no nothing. There's some zones where you can't even go into them. For example, like northwestern Hawaiian Islands, you have to have special permits to go into that area. So there's various levels of what an MPA can consist of or allow activity wise.
I have Antarctica on my water bottle.
Yeah. But it's definitely something like I wish we had more MPAs.
Biden just signed something about doing a 30 by 30 in the US waters.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the global 30 by 30.
Right.
Then there's like 30 by 30 for each country. He's like promised to start on it.
That, which would be great.
Politicians, so.
Yeah, it's like,
that's my answer.
I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, it's like it's easy to sign on to something. I mean, I think I saw something about like an evaluation of his first 100 days, and there was quite a bit of like environmental stuff, ocean stuff, not as much, which is sadly kind of common.
It's problematic
because people aren't in the
ocean. It's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, terrestrial people. We're among terrestrial. We have national parks where people just go and like obviously they love those.
Which
and
it's still
they're awesome.
I am not saying let's not protect the land. Just personally, if our planet happens to be covered by like 70% of the ocean, maybe that might be a bigger concern.
So yeah, I've seen a couple things about that. I'm not sure if I think he may have just said he's going to do it or work towards it.
Mm-hmm.
But globally, there's still like the global 30 by 30, which is I think what it'd be awesome if every country or that has like coastal did something and did more with MPAs. But if we could push like the whole world to be like, 30 by 30, the world of the countries that have a say about their oceans, obviously.
For sure. And we have a lot of science that proves that MPAs work great.
Mm-hmm.
They are difficult to establish because you're looking into not only like regulation, governmental side of things, but also just deciding where those places go. We did a project when I was in college because my professor in behavioral biology was actually in conservation biology as well, was actually played an integral role in establishing the one of the Caribbean MPAs in the Florida Keys in that area for seahorses, which is really cool. Shout out Dr. Mason Jones, you are awesome. But we did a project in our conservation biology course where we were told to establish an MPA. And so for mine, I chose to expand the Northwestern Hawaiian Island MPA to encompass all the islands. That was what my project was for. But she was walking us through the project and was basically like, how are you going to convince the government or the legislature to establish your MPA. And some of the things that we find that we have issues with when it comes to establishing them is, at least if we're looking at wanting to protect a certain species, especially, a lot of species in the ocean don't just live their entire life cycle or entire being in one place.
Mm-hmm.
Take like a sea turtle, for example. They're traveling across the entire ocean for different stages of their life. So how do you establish an MPA, or where do you choose to establish that MPA? Do you protect where they're born? Do you protect where they're mating? Do you protect where they feed and live majority of their life? So those are some of the things that you have to like consider. And so I think that might be one of the challenges and why we haven't had the MPAs established that we need, other than just pushback from things like commercial fishing, obviously. But just like, they're tricky to determine where and how they should exist.
Yeah, I think Speak Up for the Blue has a couple podcasts that like break down the complications, because I think a lot of people just like,
I just assume it's easy, like you just draw a line and then it's protected.
I mean, I've talked to conservation people who work in like for organizations that aren't, they're educated but they're not like, you know, educated, and they are just like, why can't we just do it? Like, why can't they just sign it? And I was like, kind of, we're talking about like what you just said, like it's hard because what are we picking, who are we prioritizing, how are we going to manage it? Because a lot of times too, MPAs, they're set, but then they're not managed well, because even like national park system, even the areas we have now, like finding people is super hard. And because there's just not enough people to reinforce. Yeah, like there's not enough enforcement for MPA. I think we talked about it in my natural resource management class and did like MPAs, because you also like, as a country or as a state, whatever it is, to evaluate like if there is fishing and you're like, people may be pushing for a no take MPA, but you may still have a take MPA. I mean, like stuff like that allows
the
fishing
compromise
to continue.
You know, like how do we get some protections while still not, is it better to push through with a little bit of protection than none at all?
I mean, luckily a lot of the papers that have come out that MPAs are like really good and help biodiversity are in areas where there was still fishing. So it does show like, hey, you can have a
little bit of both.
Like we can let some of this fishing happen, like, you know, a lot of people's economies, livelihoods.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have to like fully, not everything, there should be some, and most scientists will say it's totally good that there are going to be completely like no take areas, but that we can also have areas with fishing where MPAs are still very successful and good for the ecosystem.
For sure. And to your point, even if we figure out a way to establish them, enforcing them is a whole nother issue, especially so like commercial fishing is a hard thing.
I mean, people can't even get like, I've seen so many things on like TikTok, Instagram, where people have been reported and that can't even get enforced because of certain things. And part of it is like, well, even if they have a video of them petting a manatee, there's like things that need to be proven. There's getting a hold of someone. Like even when people are like documenting things now, we don't even see punishment happening. So it's hard.
So let alone in the middle of the ocean where you can't physically document them.
Yeah, like watch Whale Wars. Like just people who are talking about like enforcement, like how's it hard? Watch Whale Wars and how they've, like, I don't love Sea Shepherd, but that's a good show in demonstrating how hard it is to find
a boat,
a giant boat. It is a ship, you know, huge, that like has whale carcasses all on it, and like a whale ship, and then a whole fleet finding them. I mean, they had seasons where they didn't even find any.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard. And like Southern Ocean's the smallest ocean. And so that's, I'm just like, it's a lot harder.
Think about the Pacific. Like finding a dot in the middle of the ocean. What do you mean?
Impossible.
Yeah.
Well, that's why like protecting the high seas is so hard.
For sure.
Because
and even, I mean, even in coastal regions, like I remember I was talking to Corey, who used to work for us. She now works down in French Polynesia, but I'm sure it's still an issue that's going on. But especially a couple of years ago, there was this huge issue. There is an established MPA around French Polynesia, and commercial fishing fleets were basically coming in right up to the border, if not going over it. And it was happened to Galapagos last summer. Yeah. Galapagos as well. And those are places that are highly regulated, and like the attention is on those places. and had tracking information literally on the ships. Like they had the tracking from the ships showing that they were going into the MPA, and it was still extremely hard to get governments to enforce those sorts of things.
Yep.
So as much as I wish like that ambassador for the species thing would work out and we would see something like what was demonstrated in this movie, it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah. Well, that's because so much of it is like part like political, and that's like sadly kind of, but also that's just life. I mean, there's money that's going into things like just establishing like a no-take MPA, for example. You're gonna get a ton of like flashback if there's flashback, whatever, hit back, whatever the word is. But if
Backlash.
there are like backlash. Why can't I think of words? Backlash. If there was fishing, because those are people's jobs and livelihoods are taking away, even if it is for the greater good of the planet. We are humans, we're going to be inherently selfish. I mean, if there was like a no tourism MPA, because there are places where they take
Northwestern Hawaiian Islands,
where you can't even go, and if they just were like, oh, we're going to do that in, I don't know, like Sharks Cove,
super popular,
Sharks Cove, no more snorkeling, DLNR is going to be there all day. People are going to be pissed, even though it would be good for that ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, look at the whale watching regulations went into play up here. People are losing their minds and like hating each other over the little views about it, even though it's supposed to be helping a critically endangered population.
For sure.
Human nature is so fun.
Well, I think too, we just have a problem where we're not very good at looking at like long-term results. We're really used to like the immediate. So for us as humans, we don't see the immediate, oh, well, if I don't fish here, maybe I'll actually have a lot more fish outside of that zone because it's going to be protected in the long term, and that those species will maybe be able to recover. And it's not, they do also sometimes establish like temporary MPAs. That's something that can happen as well.
Like fish, there's like tons of like fishing moratoriums within, like Canada has them. They cut off fishing for certain species,
right? Or even like seasons. That's a really common thing. Like in Florida, they do it here in Hawaii, where like you can only lobster in Florida for certain months of the year. You can only look for certain things certain months. So it's definitely something that it's possible it could happen. It's just so much more complicated than this movie makes it.
Than a dancing penguin and the UN fighting over, like, it's so funny.
But I will say, on the more positive note, it really does show a good example of how if enough people speak up and care about something, that change will happen.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like if enough people fell in love with this dancing penguin that they demanded change in their governments. So I think if we can mimic that,
we've seen it happen to a certain regard in like smaller scale. I mean,
turtles with plastic straws, that's a huge
plastic straws. There's like the issues of captivity. I mean, SeaWorld's gotten the biggest flack of it, but like they stopped breeding and numbers have like attendance has gone down since documentary film. So it's like blackfish basically. And other things, like there is a correlation that shows when people push back and speak out, change does happen.
For sure. But so overall, like clearly this movie is primarily plot line. It's not as much science heavy based, but it does bring up some good stuff.
I do find it interesting that it came out, I think, in 2006 or 2008, and it clearly has stuff with like plastic pollution. And so when I'm watching it now, I'm just like, how did we like not register that? And then it just kept getting worse. And it's something like, I'm always like, I never heard about plastic pollution until I literally like moved to Hawaii in 2017. But like it's in other movies. Like there are other movies I've seen too where they talk about pollution.
I think
subtly.
It's one of those things where you have to just see it over and over and over again. And no matter what, conservation is most effective when people are affected by it.
Yeah, so
like just make everyone eat taking people out to see sharks, guaranteed that like majority of those people would probably not care about them nearly as much without seeing them.
Steve Irwin said that best about people care about things they love and they got to see and touch the things that they love in order to care, which is sad. It's true. I mean, that's just, again, it's human nature. We when we have like
out of sight, out
a
of mind doesn't
literal
work for
like when we've
conservation.
literally touched things and we get that gratification, like instant gratification, like seeing a shark, then you're like, now I want to save them.
Right. So
Wish
I think
it
that
wasn't
is
that way.
something that if we can find ways, and I think it's so cool. Like obviously when this movie first came out, technology was not the same thing that it is now. Like even just in the movie, it's funny because like the news channels pick up the video. I'm like, that would never happen now. It would totally go through like an Instagram or a Snapchat, you know, like something like that instead, or a Facebook first. But I
was laughing at the
really
tag.
cool...
The tag on his back. I was like, I mean, my husband was like, is that accurate? It's like old, maybe old tags look, and I was like, maybe, but that I feel like the
they probably dramatized it a little bit.
I think I was like, that would definitely, like, you could argue that would impact like the animal's behavior if it was so long.
Yeah, but
yeah,
I think that is something like with the technology that we have now, we can really create those impacts in conservation and make it more tangible to more people. You know, so yeah, hopefully we can make some changes. It's cool to see an old movie talk about stuff. It's sad and cool, you know, like clearly the movie picked up on things that were issues really early on and tried to address them. It's sad that it's something that we're still having to address.
Yeah, but the sexy penguins distracted. The curviness.
I wonder too, because from what I remember, and we'll have to eventually review the second one, but from what I remember, the second one, and I haven't seen it in a while, but the second one seems more conservation packed than this one was.
I've never seen the second one.
Oh.
So I don't know.
I haven't seen it in a while, but from my understanding, they go into more conservation, or it's like more obvious. Whereas this movie, it was kind of like a last minute thing, or it was like mostly about the plot line and the characters before the actual, yeah. Not that it's not there, but so I wonder if after seeing the success of the first movie, if they were like, okay, now let's like really push this conservation stuff, you know?
Maybe.
But all right, well, thank you guys for joining us. Next time we are going to be discussing Damned to Extinction. It is Orca month in June, so we wanted to do something regarding those guys. So we're going to be discussing that in 2 weeks. So if you haven't already seen it, it's available, I believe, on Amazon and maybe some other platforms. So go check that out. That way you can join in on the discussion. And until next time, we will see you then. Bye.